Have you ever found yourself after a game of D&D debating over a particular rule that came up and trying to figure out, as a group, how to break it? As a DM, do you get that feeling of dread when your player asks, if you look at it this way? Well, we decided to turn that into a podcast. A group of DMs come together every episode as we discuss how, rules as written, we can figure out how to maximize what we can do with a rule and how we can use other rules to break the game. Each episode, we will be joined by a guest, including DMs from some of our favorite podcasts, and get a sneak peek behind the DM screen from some of our favorite shows as they share their own thoughts and experiences on a particular rule and how it has affected their games. Please feel free to jump in on our discussions by leaving us a comment on Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher, or feel free to email me at dm@dndraw.com, or send us a tweet to @rules as written and let us know how the rule may have come up during one of your games or how you figured out a way to break the game that we didn't discuss. So, thanks for joining us. Hey, this is Tony.
Hi, it's Bethany.
Hey, Rachel here.
Hey, I'm Jacky.
Today, we're going to be going into spellcasting and everything associated with it. Jacky, where can people find you at?
You can find me on deathbymage.com, and you can also find me on Twitter at deathbymage.
Basically, anywhere there are mages dying, Jacky is there.
Or anywhere where mages are the source of your dilemmas and death, I am there.
Yeah, mage-related deaths.
Magical-related deaths are all my forte.
Excellent. Next thing is our lovely interview questions.
They're so hard.
So difficult. So speaking of Death by Mage, Jacky, tell us a little bit about what you create.
I write blog content on my website, dealing with anything from how to actually kill your players to also how to incorporate some homebrew ideas and expand on existing ideas that you may have. And I also write RPG content, so I also do other RPGs, and I also write D&D content like my gold bestseller Journey into the Feywild.
No big deal. You know, it's just sort of, yeah.
Just a gold bestseller.
It's pretty awesome. Yeah.
Awesomeness, you know. Number one this and number one that.
It's still available now, right?
Yes, it is still available now.
People can act now and get their own copy.
Yes, they can.
Were you doing an updated version of that? I remember you mentioned that last time.
I am still working on the updated version of that. We're including 20 new pages, so we're including new character backgrounds for Fey-inclined characters, and we're also including new character options. So we have new warlock patrons for all 4 of the basic Fey courts: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And we're also including a couple of different extra things, and we're also including more adventure hooks. So it's about 20 new pages of content.
Wow.
Nice.
As if the 60 wasn't already enough the first time around.
You'll get to 100 at some point, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? The 20 extra pages is the cutoff. We're happy with this. It's divisible by 4. We're done.
Yeah. Yeah. More is always better, right?
Yeah. And it'll be in a nice hardcover and everything.
Ooh.
Wow.
Yeah. I decided to go no, we're going hardcover and we're going glossy paper. We're going to spend money on this, which also means the cost might be a little higher, but I think everyone will forgive me for that.
Yeah. It's an investment, right?
Yeah, it's an investment. Who doesn't want Journeyman's art cover to be in hardcover gloss?
Yeah, it's intense already, just seeing it digitally, so that's pretty epic.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. All right. So, Jacky, since you were the one that initially suggested it, why did you want to talk about spellcasting?
Spellcasting is probably the most iconic feature of Dungeons & Dragons. It actually is what is identifiable about Dungeons & Dragons, because the way Dungeons & Dragons permutated was from wargaming, and it was from historical medieval wargaming. And Gary used to be very accurate with his representation of medieval armor and having the mechanics for it. And down the road, when magic was introduced into the game, it changed the way the game was portrayed. It's no longer this kind of simulation. It is now a story. It is now something fantasy oriented, and it's pretty much been one of the most backbreaking mechanics of the entire game.
What, you're saying the game would be simpler if everybody was a fighter or a rogue or a monk, but
Pretty
not
much.
magical?
Yeah, pretty much.
Hold on. There's a spell called Wish that lets me do whatever I want.
Sort of.
Within DM's, how the DM feels that day.
Yeah,
Unless the DM
but
says
if you
you can't
use
have
that
it.
option, you have a 33% chance of never being able to cast it again.
Also, all of the negatives and all that.
Yeah, but that's just minor.
By that point.
So I think what's interesting, Jacky, is when you proposed this, it was let's not talk about individual spells, though those might be examples, but more how does spellcasting work, kind of at a macro level, right? Because
Right.
it's once you've been playing the game, you understand the mechanics of how different types of spells interact and casting times and everything. But it really is a lot to get your arms around. And as we were talking about earlier, there are definitely some facets of spellcasting that some of us ignore or forget because there's a lot to remember. We just want to do cool stuff.
Yeah, it is definitely one of the harder mechanics to really wrap your head around, especially since the classes that implement spellcasting have flavorfully different ways of implementing magic, and then mechanically have different effects that are usually going to be unique to that class, even though spellcasting is supposed to be kind of universally like, oh, everyone has access to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, since we're talking about the difficulty of it and everything like that, like what would you think in terms of elements of spellcasting provide the most confusion to someone trying out a caster for the first time?
The one element that will always stump new players from the get-go is character creation and always during the course of play. Preparing spells versus spontaneously knowing spells. That confuses everyone till the day they die.
I will say, that's why I have encouraged players who want to play Spellcaster to do it. I'm like, let's just put you Sorcerer to start, then you have a very defined list of spells or something where you're not having to choose, because I think you're right, it can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Not that it's bad, but that does add a complication. It gives you more freedom, but it gives you more opportunities also to have the wrong spells, too, where you're like, I could have had the spell we really need. Darn it!
Oh, I could do create water, but...
Yeah. The other thing that I find that a lot of people trip over as well is spell slots versus how many they know or have access. Like preparing versus knowing versus slots. And I'm always like, slots is how many you can cast per day, guys. But you might not know that many, or you know way more than that. And I'm like, I don't understand. And I'm like, how can I put this into terms that make sense?
Yeah.
Spell slots is the actual power that you have. That is your actual power.
Yeah.
What you know is you're prepared, or what you have access to.
Yeah.
And that's how I see it. But
Yeah, if they have 2 prepared and they have 2 slots, they can cast each one once.
Or they can cast
one twice.
or
Yeah,
one
but
twice, right.
they think they can only cast each one of those once. And I'm like, no. You can cast one once, you can cast one twice, you can cast each one once. And they're like, I don't understand. And I'm like,
Well,
Gotcha.
funny you should mention that, because actually the way you were describing you have 2 slots and you only can cast 1 spell per slot is inspired from actually the grandfather of how D&D spellcasting was originated.
Tell us the story.
more.
Go for
Story
it.
time with Jacky.
Okay, so for anyone who's played Dungeons and Dragons since pretty much first edition, or even for new players now, the way that this mentality of, okay, I have 2 first level spell slots, and I have the ability to prepare 2 spells. Okay, I will prepare 2 different spells, and when I'm casting them, I have, in older editions, it used to be you can only use 1 spell slot for that 1 spell. And so but in 5th edition now, it doesn't matter how many spells you put in the allotment for that spell level anymore. It just matters that you have spell slots. And so, for example, you have 2 spell slots, you have 2 spells prepared. So say one of them is Magic Missile. You can cast Magic Missile twice and use up all your spell slots, or you can cast Magic Missile and the other spell you have. It's up to you. Or you can cast the other spell twice. It's entirely up to you. But the way that the older mentality of you only can cast Magic Missile once, and then you don't have access to it anymore, comes from a term called Venetian spell casting, which is derived from Jack Vance's novel series, The Dying Earth. And in that portrayal of magic, wizards actually could only prepare a certain amount of spells per day. because it was a representation of their mental faculty and as well as their physical capacity through material components. So it wasn't that, it wasn't really you cast a spell and forget it forever. It was more of you can only physically and mentally prepare to cast this spell so many times before it just wrecked your body. And so that is how it was portrayed. And in a way, that was how it was carried over in especially 2nd edition and 3rd edition. But by the time we got to 4th and 5th, the portrayal of magic has kind of changed. 5th edition's brought sort of that feeling back, but now it's added a lot more openness, and so so that's where the confusion starts happening, because most people are thinking to themselves, "Oh, I can only cast this once," and this is something that's permeated from cultural reasons, because D&D has influenced culture in so many different places in different ways that this actually has somehow become an artifact of how we interpret magic now.
That's a good point. It does kind of have sweeping implications. I think kind of we were coming at the accessibility level, and Rachel was talking about it, like what goes wrong for new players. I think part of it is also there's all these facets of a spell, right? Beyond just even how do I prepare it, how do I know it, how do I cast it into, but what is this whole like somatic thing? Like what the heck is that? Like what are what are components? Like it becomes a little bit of like a, I don't know, like a flight checklist for new players a little bit. They're like, have you met all these criteria before you can take off? Like
does it have verbal components? Did I say what I'm supposed to say? Does it have the somatic components? Did I wave my hands in the air appropriately?
Did I flutter my arms?
Do I have the right materials that I need in order to cast the spell?
Yeah, and I think part of that is, I will say as a DM, especially early on, I kind of just didn't worry about a lot of that. I was more just like, did you prepare it? Do you, or know it, depending on your class? And do you have the right casting time? I don't really care about much else, because I was more just like, let's survive and figure this out. But as you get into more complex situations, more of those details matter. Like, do you have access to the resources to cast your spell? Which I know we had sort of an interesting Twitter thread that started, apparently just because I tagged Jacky on Twitter. People were like, spellcasting components!
It's like, whoa, buddy.
And, and the thing is, it really comes from like the heritage, like, I guess you could say like your heritage in the game. Like if you're coming from, for example, my origins are mostly from the end of AD&D 2nd edition to the beginning of 3rd edition. And so there's a difference in power level from casters than there is now. Even though spellcasting is still the most powerful feature in the game, the portrayal of magic has definitely shifted a lot from those editions since. And back in like more older editions, magic is the end all solution of everything. Oh, we have a mob to deal with. Oh, we'll just cast the one fireball. I may not be able to cast it for the rest of the day, but I solved the problem right away.
It's done.
Fireballs do solve a lot of problems. Granted, they also create new ones, but they do solve problems.
They do.
Oh, everything's on fire now.
Whoops.
But I think that's a good point. It sort of has changed over time. We started in 3.5, and I would say I was a sorcerer who overall I was not very good because I did not understand what I was doing, and it was not very accessible. So even now, where I mentioned there's all the stuff you have to do for 5e, it did not feel as... It's harder to make bad choices, I think, in 5th edition. Like, even if you prepare the wrong spells, or you pick the wrong spells, you would really have to go to a lot of effort to be not a capable caster, even with poor choices.
Right.
So I think that's one of the strengths of 5th edition, at least for me, compared to 3.5, where I chose really bad spells because I was like, I'm going all in on fire. Oh wait, there's other things you want to do with spells?
Oh.
So you went, the thing that you did though is you went all combat focused. Like you were really great in combat for burning everything.
I was. It was
you
all
had
fire.
No utility outside of combat.
No, I wasn't supposed to have utility in my idea.
Sorcerers and utility leads to basically you're a useless caster.
Yeah, I don't know. So just go pick your thing, go all in. But at the same time, I definitely, that was not a very well built character because I was very clueless.
You had a clueless DM as well, so.
We learn as we go. People who are listening are like, they keep bringing up the tragic game again. They need to move on with their lives.
No.
You will always remember those games where you made some poor choices.
It's not just even that. It was Bethany and my first game playing and Rachel's first DMing.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
On top of
Yeah.
Of any tabletop role-playing game for us. Like, we had no foundation. I'm like, I have played video game RPGs. But anyways, yeah, it's still, we refer back to it because we made only bad choices as players.
Only the worst
choices.
choices.
Let them make bad choices as a DM. I'm like, sure.
But referring back to that Twitter thread, people feel much more strongly about components than I ever would have imagined.
Oh, no, it's a serious debate topic. It is.
How? Why? Why do people care so much?
It has a lot to do with it delves into the way of how people play their D&D games. You're going to have players who are usually going to be more about the story and narrative, and so they're not going to be so, I guess, overbearing about details. And then you're going to have games and scenarios and situations where scarcity does matter, and they do care about those certain details. Especially since casters are still very powerful. They want to make sure that they feel like you're going to be rewarded for your power and actually go through effort, as opposed to, some portrayals. It feels like magic is just too good regardless. And it really just feels for a lot of people that for material, especially for certain parts of the components, like material components especially, it's very flavorful, especially when you're thinking about things like for Fireball, for example. It's iconically in its entire history has always been the material component of having a pile of bat guano.
Yeah, of course. That's what it logically makes sense.
Yes, but it explicitly states bat guano. So it's just one of those things that it has a very deep heritage to the spell, and it's one of those things that a lot of people are going to feel that it's an important representation of both the aesthetic of the spellcasting and also in situations in storytellings where scarcity and supplies do matter.
So I gotta ask then, for your opinion on this, then what are your thoughts on the arcane focus, at least that 5e has, that basically says, unless the material component has a cost, the arcane focus is your material component.
You got your pouch. You've got a pile of bat guano on reserve for whenever you need it, because you have harvested a bunch in your lifetime or something weird. There's a story there.
There is stories there. We've actually, I remember my Forgotten Realm days where we actually had to actively look for like a bat infested cave so I can literally harvest metric tons worth of bat guano to toss fireballs in down the road. So there was like one bag of holding where you really should not actively touch.
Yeah. Don't look in that one. Don't worry about it.
Don't look in that one. But focuses are kind of one of those things that was something that was first introduced in 4th edition to kind of mitigate that kind of that punishing quality that most players always felt, especially in older editions, especially for new players who felt, why do I have to keep track of these things? And especially when in 4th edition, it made more sense because all the character classes were very balanced against each other. So it wasn't like magic was like the most powerful feature anymore. And so there was kind of no need to have basically to punish the players for not having material components. So it just felt more like, well, we can give you a focus that acts as a mystical conduit. And on top of that, we can give you a new magical item type that we can now start creating more design opportunities for ourselves and as options for the players. Because I can tell you in 4th edition, there were a lot of magic items that used magic focuses that have extra abilities and bonuses all the time.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I would say, really, the time it has come up in my game in 5th edition that we really do care about components is like this. It happened just this past Saturday, my game, where we were going over, all right, have we invested in the materials for Revivify? I'm pretty sure, Rachel was like, I'm pretty sure we banked one. We've got another. Do we want to buy another one? And I would say probably early on, I was pretty permissive. Like, if you guys have the money, I'll say you bought it. I don't mind too much. But, some people would prefer to make that something that really drives the story forward, is making sure you are managing those resources. Or if you're somewhere like you're wandering in the Underdark, where are you going to find that perfect gem that you need?
Right. And it really kind of it depends on how you're facilitating the story. Like, especially like in Out of the Abyss, adventure module where scarcity is a real thing. not having material components can be very devastating, and it can definitely influence your choices.
Yeah, I will say there were points okay, my character was good, but like, you know, sometimes you're like, you choose to be good, right? And there were a couple times where we met people who might have needed some greater restoration, and I was like looking at our resources going, sorry, I don't think we can afford it right now. I mean,
50 gold, gem per use, I think it was.
yeah, which is a lot, especially when you can't go and get the gems. So there were a few NPCs who I was like, I hear your hard luck story that the Underdark has driven you crazy, but, we can't really fix you right now.
Hold on.
You can apply again later once we are back in funds. We will consider your application and see what we can do for you. See if we can place you, you know, with some healing. For now, we'll lesser restoration you. Some, you know, keep the crazy down for a little bit, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Yeah, and that's a great, but that's still a very great role playing example of like, you know, where the story can be driven by scarcity. But it feels like that where, for those kind of stories where it's important. But when it comes to like, oh, I'm in the middle of a metropolis where I'm well funded and there are stores everywhere, I shouldn't have a problem. And so it's just one of those things that, you know, it really just depends on where you are in your story and how, if it is relevant. And that's just one of those things for dungeon masters. They have to decide for themselves, like, is it relevant at this particular moment?
Yeah,
Pick your battles.
like Bethany was saying, like I had having run Out of the Abyss where there's lots of points where they're not in any city, not capable of getting, and I just looked it up just to confirm, the diamond dust worth 100 gold to cast a greater restoration. Sometimes it's been like, okay, I know you have this spell, you can't cast it yet.
Yeah.
You haven't been to a city, like you just got it, you haven't been to a city and it works story wise.
Yeah, to be fair, Out of the Abyss is basically like the Oregon Trail, where you're like, we have fortified our wagon with resources, but we need to make it to Menzoberranzan, so we need to make sure we have what it takes to survive to get there through months and months of travel, which is the entire reason that my character was a ranger, because I was like, I don't want to wander the Underdark and get lost and die, because that is a sad story.
It is a very sad story because you're gonna, there's more terrors in the Underdark to kill you than there are.
Right. The Underdark's already trying to kill you. Don't let it starve you to death or, you know, drive you insane.
Oh yeah, with that, it's like, yeah, you can starve. You can get lost. You can get killed by the normal Underdark monsters. You can get killed by demons. You can lose your mind.
Yeah.
All just between two places.
All between two places. And God forbid if you start incorporating like the Feydark, then you also get planar transport out of that and then sent into the whirlwind of forever of darkness and terror.
Slow down, Satan, okay?
Or you can be enthralled by like an aberration like an aboleth. Who knows?
These things can happen.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Go and try and make a deal with some of the beholders down there. It's okay.
Yeah, they you know, they won't ponder about, you know, just disintegrating you on the spot for just sportsmanship.
Yeah, for funsies.
Yeah, why not?
You have to do something to fill the time, okay? Like, when you got a long life, you got to do stuff. That's just how it goes.
Yeah.
Hobbies, they're important.
Hobbies, really?
Hobbies.
They're hobbies.
Hobbies are important. For a beholder, it's a hobby.
It's a hobby.
I actually remembered in one Underdark game I ran once, I had a beholder run kind of an arena. So there was gladiators and everything and they were all prisoners. So the players had to fight against every kind of conceivable terror out of the Underdark.
Gosh.
And I think the worst one was the Umber Hulks.
Umber Hulks is pretty terrible.
The look is what's nasty.
Mm-hmm.
It's rough, but I don't know. Facing against an entire mosh pit full of black puddings was pretty bad for them.
Oh, no.
Yes.
Never mind. That one.
Rachel
I
says
picked
yes.
that one to know.
So I feel like we've hardly like dipped a toe in the pool of what the parts of spellcasting are. We've talked about a little bit about casting time, a little bit about components, a little about the whole, you know, somatic and
verbal, somatic, and material
components, but we haven't talked about like rituals, which drive me up a wall because I forget about them until somebody says, "Is that a ritual tag?" And I'm like,
So certain spells have the special tag ritual. Such a spell can be cast following the normal rules for spell casting, or the spell can be cast as a ritual. The ritual version of the spell takes 10 minutes longer to cast than normal, but it doesn't expend a spell slot, which means the ritual version of a spell can't be cast at a higher level.
I just had a realization, Tony. I've been misreading this. It takes 10 minutes longer, so it takes 10 minutes and 6 seconds.
Yes.
Well, the 6 seconds is digging all the stuff out.
Yeah,
If the normal casting time's an action, I just ignore that.
I know, it doesn't really matter, but it's just the insult of it all.
But then there's spells that should be rituals like Prayer of Healing.
Yes.
I'm really surprised that one isn't.
I was surprised as well.
Well, it basically is, except it takes a spell slot.
Yeah, it's like and every time I see it's like and somebody will instinctively make that mistake of choosing Prayer of Healing and then telling me, oh, we're going to cast Prayer of Healing in the middle of combat. And I'm like, you do realize that's a 10-minute casting time spell, right?
Rachel.
Yeah.
I've got this awesome spell. Wait, what?
Wait, never mind.
It's like, wait, no, Prayer of Healing's not the one. I meant Healing Word. That one.
And then you're like, this healing is really puny.
I won't lie. It was like definitely one of those spells when you look at it, you're just going, it probably should have been a ritual, but it would have been too good as a ritual.
Yeah, it's a pretty great spell when you have the time. It gives you...
I mean, an extra little bit, like, just of health if you don't have that full short rest time span, especially. Mm-hmm. That can be really useful.
Oh, yeah.
But that also means you don't get to spend the spell slot.
No.
So I'm trying to remember. I think we started talking this before we actually started recording about casting times and casting spells, multiple spells in the same turn, and how sorcerers are wonderful / ruin everything depending on your perspective for how
quicken spell.
Yeah. So
twin spell. What are you talking about?
Oh man,
the twin spell. Don't know.
No. You know what's worse? When you actually use both of them together on one spell.
I know.
So do you want to explain how that works?
Sorcerers have all of these different abilities that allow them to essentially, like, power up their spells.
Cheat. It allows them to cheat.
Because all their magic's innate, so instead of learning how to cast the spell, they learn how to manipulate the spell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
I love sorcerers.
Meta magic, which, mind you, being a sorcerer is awesome. DMing for someone who is a sorcerer, but
That's how you really feel.
Yeah, so for reference, the spells have casting times. You've got your actions, your bonus actions, and your reactions. And for most people, it's pretty straightforward. You're typically casting one spell per turn, and for the most part, it's going to be an action. And then your bonus action, you could do something else, or more likely, you just sort of stare for a second because you don't have something really valuable to do with your bonus action.
Yeah.
Which always makes me sad when I'm like, but I'm not maximizing my turn.
Action economy.
But sorcerers basically get to break those rules and have the opportunity to cast more than one spell per turn.
Yes.
And manipulate spells
manipulate spells.
And manipulate the spells. So, twin spell allows a sorcerer to cast, I believe it's a single target.
Yep.
Has to be a single target, spell, but they can cast it to 2 targets.
Right. So in other words, spells that have the ability to target multiple enemies, such as Scorching Ray or Magic Missile, actually is not applicable.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But like just easy one, Firebolt that can just target one enemy. Now he can essentially turn it into like an Eldritch Blast type thing and target 2.
So what we were talking about was that sort of restriction is you can't cast like 2 leveled spells together in the same turn. Even if you're using your meta magic to allow you to cast 2 spells, one of them has to be a cantrip.
Specifically, I believe it is, you cannot cast a bonus action leveled spell and then your action has to be a cantrip.
Right.
Correct. Yeah, you're right. That, I think I didn't understand that restriction when I first started DMing with a very low level sorcerer, and then as I got higher level, I was like, I get it. I don't need more than 1 fireball per turn. Granted, if you multi-classed and got Action Surge.
Oh, yeah.
Action Surge is the one way that a caster can cast 2 leveled spells in a single turn, which is how I found out, Double Disintegrate.
Yeah, it does Double Disintegrate. It's the best.
Yeah,
when you twin that, it's the best.
Or the worst if you're the DM.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm usually the DM who's casting the twin double, disintegrate.
Then you're fine. Then you're good.
Yeah, my players hate me for it.
But yeah, basically, most bonus action spells, like you can cast it as a bonus action, but you have to use a cantrip as your action if you want to cast another spell.
Which brings up, we haven't really talked about cantrips. I love cantrips. I want cantrips. I go out of my way to get cantrips.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
I'm a big fan.
I love cantrips, especially the way they've been portrayed ever since 4th edition. That was the best improvement. It increased the versatility of casters so much.
Yes, they're like, I can't do a bunch of these things all the time, but I have a few things I can do consistently. And whether that's you got your firebolt, just I run out of spell slots, I still got something I can do, or it's something lower level that like guidance, I think is a really underrated spell.
It's very good.
That lets you give just a little buff to your friends. Like, hey, I believe in you, buddy. You go get him.
When you know you're going into something as like just, I have all the time, like, oh, I'm just going to try to do something. Oh, guidance. Here's a D4. And a D4 for you. And then a D4. Oh, you want to try something? D4 for you?
You can do it, buddy.
You can do it.
Do you have any favorite cantrips, Rachel?
So when I played Nyx, I spammed Chill Touch and Frostbolt every chance I got.
That was your warlock.
In and out of combat. Like, oh, there's a fire that needs to be put out. Frostbolt, 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 Frostbolt. He was like, sure. It eventually goes out. I'm like, yes.
Yeah. So the thing that's so great about them is that it still takes a casting time. So you're still investing the time to do it, but it's not using up your spell slots because you're like, I know this like the back of my hand. I could do this in my sleep. So it gives you that flexibility, to do it out of combat too. Because otherwise, I will admit as a player, I don't like to use my spells out of combat unless I need to because I'm like, I might need these for combat. I'm sorry, guys. I need to hoard these for later.
Bethany can attest to this. I had an NPC that used Shocking Grasp as a joy buzzer.
Nice.
And I was like, that's so annoying.
I will say I always love Shocking Grasp. It's one of those very useful, like, oh, I'm being attacked by something in my face. I'm going to Shocking Grasp it, and oh, it has no reaction now. I'm going to walk away.
Goodbye.
Thank you for your time. I am leaving now.
Yeah, cantrips are really did help improve the game. The best part also is for the ones that deal damage, they scale, so they actually keep up with martial characters like the fighter. Well, not really, but they
can try.
They can try. They can keep up definitely with like the martial characters that only get 2 attacks for their extra attack actions, and those are fine. Fighters are the only specialty ones where it's like, you can deal like a bucket of damage
and attack and attack and attack and attack.
God forbid if you're a champion fighter with all those crits.
Attack and attack and attack and attack and action surge, attack and attack and attack and...
Oh man,
God
I love fighters.
Fighters are always good. I never stop loving fighters.
It's okay. We just did the multi-classing episode. I was like, who shouldn't multi-class to get an action surge and a second wind? I mean, everybody needs that in their life.
Just 2 levels.
Just 2 levels.
2 levels.
Yeah.
And then you might as well go for 4 so you get the ability score. Like, it just makes sense. Everybody should just be a good part fighter, in my opinion.
It depends. Like, if you're like a 18th level wizard and you took 2 levels in fighter, the action surge is pretty powerful already.
Yep.
Because you still get one of the signature spells, and that's pretty good. I will say the other spellcaster potent build is like 3 sorcerer and 17 wizard, just so you can keep your 9th level spell slot. You lose out on the signature spell, but that's irrelevant because you get meta magic. Who cares?
You could do anything you want. Man, we've talked about sorcerers a lot. We all must really like sorcerers.
No, sorcerers are really powerful.
They're fun.
I'm more of a warlock person myself.
Well, warlocks,
I get that.
Warlocks have the best utility out of practically everyone except maybe clerics.
Well, as long as you're running the right kind of campaign. If you're not getting those short rests, though, then your warlock falls apart really fast. And you're like, guys, I'm so tired.
I use my magic spell.
Magic is hard.
Those invocations, though.
The invocations are good.
That's what gives warlocks
gave me
some
my polymorph.
serious power.
So Rachel, you want to explain about your warlock's invocation?
So I took the one where I could do polymorph like once per day. And then I polymorphed myself into a T-Rex because why not?
What else are you doing with your life?
What else am I doing with my life? I mean, I'm a warlock without Eldritch Blast, so everybody already gives me a hard time anyways. I just turn into T-Rex and stomp on them. My warlock build was, though, she was built to be like a mid to melee fighter, cause she was Undying Light, so she went in, stabbed things, knocked down, poofed back alive and did a lot of damage and then kept going was her whole build, which was a lot of fun. A lot of fun. But
that's the real goal.
That's the real goal. It's just to have fun. She was also ridiculous. But, I don't know. I think that's one of my, the favorite ones that I did when I went to 17 Warlock 3 Fighter. So I got the extra fighter bonuses. Just because looking at level 20 Warlock, I was like, it's not jumping out at me. But man, Chill Touch and Frostbite and all those little dinky spells, and I'm like, I kill everything with them.
Yeah.
All those cantrips.
It's so good.
So I'm going to bring up my biggest gripe with playing a caster, which is I've played casters, I've played melee fighters, I I love both in different ways, but the thing that I think drives me crazy as a player and DM sometimes is those area of effects for spells and the range. Because there are so many times where you're like, I have the most brilliant spell solution to a problem. Wait, let me do math and count squares and figure things out. I know other people resolve that differently, but it can be very tricky with some spells, just figuring out where's my spell going off, how much do I like my allies, and how many enemies am I trying to go after right now? It requires like some extra mental effort.
Let's be honest, it's where can I put my fireball to kill the maximum amount of enemies but not hurt my allies?
I was trying not to be a cliche, Tony. Jeez.
But that is you.
I will say though, they gave one class that ability for the sake of it, and it was like, they actually no, two, because sorcerers have that ability, but the wizard has the best. The evocation wizard is the best one. It's one of the strongest builds, actually, because of the fact that you can just target anything that has an evocation spell and just be like, well, everything that deals damage that I don't have to worry about my allies anymore because they will always be protected. They autosave, they take no damage, and I just kill everything around them.
Yeah, because I can shape my spells around them.
Sculpt spell, I think is what the ability is called.
It's probably the most potent feature that the wizard gets, or the evocation wizard gets. Overchannel is kind of fun, but definitely the sculpt spell is the pinnacle.
The one thing for that though is I had Chris had an evocation wizard for our Orenthal campaign, and he's like, "All right, I can put the fireball here," and I'm like, "Just quick heads up, if I had it mentioned, all the buildings around you are old and all are made of wood." He's like, "Yeah, but wait, no, I can protect creatures. Do I want everything to be on fire?"
And I think we all said, just do it, whatever. We'll deal with it.
We'll deal with that fallout.
But, okay, but part of the reason I brought up the whole, I have a gripe with this is it takes me back to, geometry class, where I'm like, shapes, cones, cylinders, spheres. Is this why we had math? Was it preparing for D&D?
That's all it was.
It was preparing for D&D.
Yeah, because I think that gets really... I do okay with most of them. I will admit when we're doing, something that is a cone, we use mats, and we use a little cone shape, and that helps to visually put together. But then I'll have a cylinder pops up, and I'm like, cylinder?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Seriously, game.
So I have advice for that. Usually what I like to do is I used to like to take those old when I was in college and I was poor, I had transparency paper and I would actually measure out the dimensions for all the spells. Now back in 3.5, the dimensions for spells were actually less geometrically accurate and more square grid-like. So it was pixelated. So it was easier to craft those. In 5th edition now, it's more geometrically correct. So it's okay, well, we're just going to ambiguously assume if it's in the if your mini is in the line of the effect, it is considered attached to the effect. So, luckily in the modern age of this mainstreaming of D&D, there's companies now that create these spell templates. They don't cost a whole lot. I know Arknight was one that I bought from. And I bought for $40, I think. It was for just the wizard spells, and it has templates for the most famous average spell sizes. So you have the fireball size, you have the small 10-foot square, you have a nice little ruler to help you measure up to 120 feet, and then you also had cones of various sizes, and some of them even included the spell names, because they knew you're going to be using this for fireball.
Well, let's be honest.
It's here's the spell, here's the spell damage, here's even to tell you how to what saving throw the enemies need to make, and how far away that you can put this circle from you. So it was nice. It was very handy. It was very helpful. It was good for my players to visualize it, especially as you said, Bethany, with all the casters with their area effects. They sometimes have to go, where am I angling this?
Yeah. How am I looking at this? Is there, heaven forbid, there's different levels of terrain.
Right.
Because then things get really squirrely.
Yep.
But
someone's flying.
Yeah. And then you have to check if it is a sphere or not, because some effects are not a sphere at all. And then you're so they don't actually include them. No.
Right. Yep. I would say when you compare that to, your rogues, your fighters, what are you going to do? I'm going to stab that guy, or I'm going to hit him over the head with an axe. There's a certain elegance to the simplicity of it, but you just don't get to wipe out, 30 kobolds all at once with your axe.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm kind of glad they did not bring Cleave back.
There's the Battle Master ability, but
yeah, it's not as good as like 3.5 Cleave or Great Cleave.
Yep. I agree.
Troy just goes, yep. So one thing we haven't talked about, I know it's not in our questions, is the thing I forget as DM, and I'm really lucky my players tend to remember, is concentration.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I remember it for what I'm controlling, but when a PC has a concentration spell, I'm like, I have no awareness of what's going on, how long you've been concentrating on it. I lose all track of that. Yeah. And overall, it's usually oh shoot, I just got whacked over the head for 50 points of damage. I think I have to make a concentration check. And I'm like, thank you for remembering, points for honesty, but yes, you have to make the check.
Yeah, and there's so many different ways people keep track of concentration, and also the other thing, for concentration for most spells, at least the combat-oriented ones, like, they're generally going to be like, they you can tell, if it says up to 1 minute, you know, this is probably for combat only, because most combat should not last longer than 10 rounds, unless it's like one of your big, epic boss battles that you're like, yeah, this is going to take more than 10 rounds. But I will say that for a lot of other spells, that concentration, it is very easy to forget. And one of the things like I usually do, like when I write down initiative for my players, is just like, okay, are you casting a spell that has concentration? All right, I write a check mark, and that's all I have to do to remind myself, like, okay, you have a concentration check to make after I hit you.
Maybe I'm nice, or I'm lazy, where I'm like, I trust you guys.
Yeah.
But we are pretty good about remembering.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you guys are good. I forget, but you guys are really good.
For me, it's like, I forget too. And I forget sometimes for my enemies, but the players will remind me too. It's like, oh, remember that banishment spell or that whole person? I wail at him. Concentration check for him. Like, oh, yes. Actually, you're right. I know.
It's like, I just did 30 points of damage. Concentration, sir.
Concentration check.
Yep.
Yeah, then we say things like, sucker. Yeah, we get very, very into it.
I do notice that from when we, 3 years ago when we started playing to now, we've definitely, improved a lot in the concentration stuff. Before, I mean, 2 years ago, if you asked what a concentration spell was, I'd been like, I couldn't name one off the top of my head. Now I'm like, all my smites, this, that, the other.
Yeah, I did have to police a little more early on, especially no, you can't cast those two spells at the same time because they're both concentration. I'm sorry. As big as your brain is, you can't think about both of them at the same time. I'm sorry. That's simply not done.
Yeah.
Which is a bummer for some types of casters where you realize, oh man, I have so many awesome concentration spells. I want all of them.
Or we could just be going back to 3.5 D&D where you could literally do that, have literally 7 spells on concentration and just be like, all right, I got all the buffs. I'm a god. That's it. I'm done. I'm walking away now.
But at the same time, you also could have arcane spell failure.
Yeah.
Which I hated.
Yeah. Let's be happy that when we finally moved on to other editions, that was the one thing that easily went away from the get-go. We were oh yes, thank you.
That idea that you're sorry, I'm just suddenly bad at what I do. I don't know why. Just magic.
Yeah. Magic doesn't work right now.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the whole, and the thing is, it's a complete design philosophy change from 3.5 to, especially from 3.5 to 4th and 5th. The design philosophy has drastically changed. It's no longer, especially when 4th came around, the mentality of design was that we shouldn't be punishing players for their choices. And so that's why you start seeing less negative modifiers. And by the time now 5th, you barely ever see a negative modifier except for one crazy clause in a spell because it's the only way they can rationalize it. And and there's no other way you can do it. But other than that, it's when 5th edition introduced disadvantage and advantage, it was just we don't have to roll, we don't have to do negatives anymore, guys. It's just gonna be really bad dice rolls.
Yep.
Yeah, I do appreciate overall the limited mathing as well because, let's be honest, I don't want to say we're bad at math. Maybe we just don't want to be good at math because
it's more of when you get past 66 and you're just all right, now I actually have to think about math.
Yeah.
I think
counting is hard.
I don't think it was so much the doing of the math. It was just remembering of all the floating modifiers. Oh, you get +2 from that, but -3 from there, but +4 from there. What are we at? Shoot, I lost track.
Right.
That happened to me just doing a Pathfinder game, for example, was you get +2 for flanking, but -1 because it's not a weapon you're used to, but also a +4 because they're prone. But then don't forget the -2 from the out of spell effect. I'm like,
And are you flat-footed?
Why?
Hold on.
Yeah. Oh, God forbid if you're flat-footed, then you have to use a completely different armor class.
Yep.
Oh God, I remember I remember when I started my 5e campaign. I actually didn't completely read all the rules either, and I was still
Who does?
Tony and
Me. I did. I'm one of the few.
But sorry, Jacky, go on.
So, like, for example, in my current campaign, I actually don't have the clause of how spells are supposed to be cast, like 2 spells per turn. I actually let my sorcerers and my wizards and everyone who has the ability to do so to cast bonus action spells at whatever level they're humanly capable of casting.
Oh
So-
boy,
and
you are
it's
a
a
brave man.
Oh, well, and to be fair, I do play very high power oriented games because my enemies are merciless and I plan to kill my players. So it's like, I will give you any advantage you can get. And and plus my campaign settings is very set in a world where magic is very, prevalent. And it's infused into the very air of the world. So to me, it's like, yeah, anybody can cast any crazy amount of spells. I'll be fine. And somebody just said to me eventually, well, what happens when your casters start getting wish? I'm like, well, they can cast 2 wishes if they can do it. I will just laugh because the results are not gonna be in their favor half the time.
They can most certainly try.
They can most certainly try. That is a great phrase I use all the time.
I love that phrase.
You gotta say it with an eye roll too. Like,
You can certainly try.
Mhm.
Yep. And it's just one of those things that I'm happier now with the fact that there's not a lot of negative modifiers, not a lot of floating modifiers to keep track of, and it's just easier to play. I mean, the only thing I will say the only other element that some people do have a hard time with is the fact that they keep spell attack on a completely separate sheet of paper than on the front of your character sheet.
I will say I have a lot of issues with how the generic character sheet is formatted, and yes, it does make spellcasting more confusing too. Like with the spell slots, the prepare and everything, the way the sheet is structured is confusing. Yeah.
It definitely could have used some more input beforehand.
Yeah.
Our gripes are petty and small.
Oh, yeah.
They're
But
petty and
also,
small.
documentation matters. Document layout is important.
It does.
Yeah, it does. And I will say I think that's like the other thing too, is like getting used to like being familiar with your spells. It's a lot easier for casters like sorcerers and bards and warlocks because and rangers, because you already know your spells and you do change them out every once in a while, but you're consistently the same. But for clerics and druids who have the hardest job because they have like this giant library of information to go through, and it's never fun.
Paladins, but
Paladins have a little easier.
Paladins.
Rachel is a paladin fan.
Rachel's a
I'm a
paladin.
big paladin fan.
Yeah.
Paladins are good this time around.
Yeah.
Smash,
Whoa,
smash, smash.
that sounded like the best backhanded compliment
I
ever.
know.
They're good this
time around.
I remember 3-5 Paladins.
You had to be lawful good.
Ugh.
We won't even talk about alignments.
Going into the other questions we had, one thing we haven't touched on is modifying or crafting spells.
Okay.
Cause that's something that like none of, our players have actually toyed with yet. So I was curious your thoughts on this because it's definitely something that's, an option in 5e. It's just,
Yeah, it's definitely an option. I will say it stems from a lot of like how comfortable a player is with the system. And it also has a measure of communicating with your dungeon master, because it can easily get either too good or very powerful. To be fair though, magic is already unbalanced anyways, but we don't want to make it that much more
We
unbalanced.
pretend it's not, man.
Yeah.
And I will say a lot of my players, I will say for the most part, most of my players, they generally, the most modification they'll ask is usually, something along the lines of, can this spell be a different element of, and usually I'll have a different way of letting them do it. But for the most part, if they're trying to like create a new spell that's exactly the same as an existing spell, but just a different elemental type, I'm usually pretty good for it. I'm usually pretty gung-ho about it, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, we have done that, Tony, when we were reflavoring things
that's true.
because I was a drow who was a light cleric.
Yeah. Well, worshipper of Elistray, so moonlight.
Different.
Yeah.
A lot of the spells focused on, rather than like, oh, you're casting a spell that has like this blinding light. It's like, oh, it's kind of this silvery moonlight effect rather than a big blinding light.
That way also, but that did make some spell modifications because otherwise some of my own spells would have blinded me because, drow are not really so great with the light. So that's the farthest we've gone, I think. It was just like, can we make this functional for the character? But I think I'm definitely scared of the overpowered spell problem because I don't see there being a situation where people are like, I created the spell. It's weak. I'm not happy with it. I think it's more like I am a god now.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, designing something from scratch is more like, it's more artistic than it is than it is mechanical. I mean, there is going to be mechanics involved, but there's a lot of, it's always one of my big advice I give for people for creating their own spells is if the effect is something that's very similar to an existing spell, you should definitely look at that existing spell and understand the wording and figure out what you would change. Because sometimes you'll find on the end of the day, are you just creating the exact same spell or is it something unique and different? And you have to look at, well, what are you changing? And something as simple as changing the range, something as simple as changing the duration is very, very likely, but also sometimes changing the nature of the spell itself. One of my examples I will give is for my other upcoming books for one of them. So spoilers for everyone who's hearing this.
Don't worry, we'll let you know when this is coming out.
Yeah. This book is nowhere near done, so it's definitely not going to be done for a long time.
Someday
in the distant future, so for my upcoming Dark Arcana book, there is like, I introduced blood spells and blood mechanics. So barring that, there were a few spells. One of them is basically the effect of the spell is, the target eventually gets encased in crystallized blood, their own blood, by the way. Oh. It's terrifying.
That is horrifying.
Yep.
So there's actually like crystallized blood emerging out of your skin amorphously, and then you're slowly being encased in this crimson tomb.
That sounds horrifying.
Yes, it's great. So,
thank you for that nightmare fuel.
You're welcome. So the thing is, the spell reminded me a lot of like how Flesh to Stone work, where you're slowly being consumed and being petrified. And so I borrowed a lot of the original kind of wording from like how that they have to make the saves, and it's the first of three, whichever one you get. And from that, but I added the part where they're being consumed and they're being restrained because it's crystal. So you're actually, while you're failing your saving throws, you're restrained. So you can't move, you can't do anything, and you're also taking damage. So that's the best part.
That's a good point. I think there's a part of all people who play casters who want to make their own spells like you do in like Elder Scrolls games where you're like, I have the coolest idea for the most weird thing. I want to combine effects from other spells and sculpt something new. And I think it just is maybe a process also of not doing a single version. Maybe that's the problem, is also the idea of I have a spell, it's done. Well, you sort of have to test it, right? The same as you would other materials. So there's sort of a process, I think, of player and DM working together and going, all right, we're dialing it in. It's not quite there yet. You burned out an entire village with your Uber Fireball or whatever it's called. Like,
I like that. Uber Fireball.
Uber Fireball. That's what we're going to do.
That's our go-to spell example. It's always Fireball.
It's a great example. Everyone loves it, always use it, so it's a good example.
Because it's cool and dramatic. It's like you're in a Michael Bay movie. There's explosions and everything. Well,
see, you haven't played D&D with kids, though, because everything is a Michael Bay movie when you're playing with kids. They're like, I'm going to cast Ray of Frost! And I'm like, it's not Dragon Ball Z, guys. Stop. And they're like, fine, you do Ray of Frost. Good job.
I mean, they're committed to the somatic components of the spell.
So, yeah.
When I tell them that they have the somatic components, they like lose their minds. They think that's the best. And they're like, so you get to do like these little hand symbols. I'm like, just like that. Yep. Just like that. And I'm like,
you put, was it your thumb together with your four fingers? Yeah.
Yeah, you do like the ninja seals from Naruto, that sort of thing.
They do all of that.
You're just rubbing your face like, why?
Yeah, no, I sit there and I let them do it. And then I'm like, please just roll your damage.
Well, to be fair though, like one of my clerics, not my cleric of Kellamvor, but I did play eventually in a D&D Egyptian campaign, and I was a favorite soul of set. So I actually used to make prayers for all of my spells. So there was like at least like 25 prayers I had written down for casting spells. Some of them were tied to certain spells only. And so like, you know, it's nice once in a while when you're having someone committed to the flavor of the flavor text of their character.
Oh no, I definitely give them like inspiration and stuff for all that. But at the same time, when they're like, I want to cast this thing, and then 5 minutes later, as they're like doing like, you know, interpretive dance and screaming random words, I'm like, please just roll your 3d6.
Now you know how real casters feel.
It gives you this idea of what casters would be like in real life, where the fighter's like, I draw my sword and I brandish it at the enemy, and they're like, "Waha!"
Exactly. But somehow they must do it within like at least 6 seconds. I don't know. That's pretty extreme.
Quick. Yeah, you gotta be quick, man. Like, it all makes sense.
Yeah. But the Dungeon Master's Guide does provide at least some basic guidelines. Like when I mean basic, I mean like 2 paragraphs.
Give us the highlights.
So the highlights are things like, if a spell is so good that a caster will want to use it all the time, it might be too powerful. And realistically though, if anyone who's played spellcasters already, there's a few go-to spells you always automatically choose because they are good.
Yeah. Well, there's stuff like that that's super powerful, or there's even like small mild things where like I play a ranger because of Hunter's Mark. Yeah. I mean,
that's handy.
That's what you do. Yeah, I think it is funny. There is a little bit of wizards. Have you looked at your own spells?
Yeah. oh, yes.
Yeah.
Please double check your spell again. Please reread it again. As the DM, I'm telling you, you need to read the wording on that, because I just 5 seconds ago said that they have blind sight, and that spell will be unaffected by their blind sight. And they're like, no. Oh, okay.
Yep.
It's like, I cast darkness. That does nothing against things with blind sense.
Congratulations. You blinded yourself.
Yes.
Like, good. Now the party can't see the enemy, but the enemy can see you.
Which means they get advantage on attack rolls. Congratulations, everybody.
Oh, yeah. Tragic, and yet it happens in every game.
Right. And I will say the one advice I like that does come from the DM, the Dungeon Master's Guide is longer durations or wider areas have lesser effects, and that's very true, because it's assuming from a mechanical standpoint you're hitting more targets, so you're actually still rolling probably the same amount of dice, but you have a wider breadth, so you gotta lower the dice a little bit sometimes. And that's just kind of more like tweaking it as you're going. And one thing I usually do for spell design also is avoid spells that have very limited or niche use. Granted though, to be fair, there are still a few niche spells, but they still have some occasional utility, versus like if you're the one they give in the book is a spell that only works against good dragons. Yeah, that's very niche. How often you may face against dragons, unless you're playing in a campaign that you're constantly fighting dragons, that's a completely different story.
Yep.
That's a good point. It's a bit conflicting, right? It should have utility, but not too much utility, right? It has to find kind of that sweet spot where you can't use it all the time, but if you use it never, then there's no point. So it's definitely something I think you find out as you go to some extent.
Definitely go.
Yeah, like in, for example, I gave at least 2 custom spells to one of my wizards, and the reason was because he had actually unearthed a tome from like one of the ancient mage civilizations. Well, the ancient mage civilization. And so they were really ridiculous spells. But there's a cost to them. There was a cost I attached to them, and one of them was madness. So he's definitely he has it. He has the scroll. He's terrified to copy it to his spellbook because he is afraid of using it because it's very powerful, but he knows the cost is way higher.
Yeah. Wise man, it sounds like.
Yes. Yep. He's very wise about it.
He knows it's a trap.
Yeah, he knows it's me going, yes, take the bait, and then I have control.
So kind of bringing up like player judgment, I think, is part of it too. Like, I think there could be a certain point, like I was talking about earlier, where I built a caster, my sorcerer, who just did fire spells. You could have a caster who is planning for a particular type of encounter or general, like, direction for the campaign, and then find out, like, in my campaign, we have Nick, who plays a sorcerer who has mostly fire spells, because that aligns with his whole backstory, and then it was a little awkward for him when it's like, oh, we're going to, like, a fire temple? So, like, they're really into fire, huh? Like really, they all use fire? Like they bathe in fire?
Let me try a firebolt. Oh, that one's immune too? Oh.
And I was
I'm
like,
gonna stab it with my dagger.
and stuff like that happens. I think that's just the nature of certain types of caster builds, and that's okay. But that would make it harder also in situations like that to test a spell if you're like, I don't think the spell is going to be immediately useful because of the nature of where they're going and what they're doing. Like, well, something Tony and I've talked about is like casting spells in the Feywild.
Yep.
How there's definitely no consequences to that, right, Tony?
Well, in the Dungeon Master's Guide, there isn't. Because there's no specific thing for it in the Dungeon Master Guide. However, having researched the Feywild, probably nowhere near as much as you, Jacky, but to a good extent, the fact that magic's like, oh yeah, it's like supercharged. All of it.
So
supercharged.
So since you've done a bunch of the Feywild and other things, have you ever had a lot of situational sort of environmental impacts on casting?
Oh yeah, I've employed those a lot. My players hate me for it.
I wouldn't know what that's like.
Oh well, no. Okay, so they've experienced a dead magic zone before, so they all hate that. They all hate that with an unholy passion.
Fair.
And then the wild magic zones are kind of a weird spot. Like, some of them like it, and some of them are kind of terrified about it.
It's moment by moment for me. I would say having been trapped in a wild magic zone for
one session.
And the thing is, I have different wild magic tables. I have the 5e one, and I have older edition ones. So I will roll to see which table I'm using to decide. So it can get very scary on some of them. The worst one, I think, was the druid in a wild magic zone tried to cast, I think he was trying to cast Healing Word. It backfired, and it transformed into a fireball centered on himself.
Oh.
And so he went down, and he took down the rogue with him.
Oh.
And he just looked at himself and just went, he looked at me for a moment, he just went, I hate you in so many different ways. And I'm like, hey,
That
don't
one-
bully me.
Whoa.
Hate the
And by the
devil.
way, I had him roll on the percentile die. I didn't even roll it. I just went, roll the percentile die and we'll decide how this goes. And he got the result that literally said, cast fireball centered on yourself. You're just like, great.
Like, awesome.
That did happen to a wild magic sorcerer that was in my game.
Yeah. And then
Which-
my other,
In a very small room.
Oh, the fireball?
Remember you guys were fighting the Wraith?
Oh.
You guys were fighting a Wraith, level 5, maybe 6, and you all wild magic zone with the wild magic sorcerer.
Yep.
And all of a sudden he's like, all right, I'm going to cast the attack spell, but a little tiny mote of flame just drops to your feet.
And we all go,
Oh,
no. In slow motion. We know what's happening. Like, mentally, we imagine our PCs turning and trying to run for the door, but it's too late.
Yeah, it's too late.
Yeah. Right after that, it's just like, okay, everyone. This room's tiny. Everyone make a dex save.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of there's no cover. You're pretty much just owned by this fireball.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, I'm having a realization. There's so much more to talk about. I think we're going to have to do a part 2. Future topics, exploits, spell point variant. Like, we haven't even got onto that.
Oh
yet.
yeah.
And those are big
Well, we
topics.
also haven't actually talked about saves versus attack rolls on spells.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've only touched on the different types of area of effects, different types of targeting. There's a lot.
There's a lot.
There
for
is a lot.
spellcasting.
There's so much.
Spellcasting can just go so many different ways. And the day we start getting psionics back into D&D.
I don't know what you're talking about. That's going to cause no problems at all. We'll just blow things up with our
So,
brains.
of course, Bethany's character in Orenthal was a mystic,
Mm-hmm.
Unearthed Arcana version 3.
Unearthed Arcana, and is another mystic, different kind, in Serviceable Plots.
I really like psionics. They're so cool.
Yeah, I like the interpretation this time around because it fits better with like what they were trying to go with psionics in 4E, but with a little bit more of a retouch in fifth edition. But but the way they kind of still did it, I kind of felt like I need more disciplines, like generic disciplines. So it's not just, I'm going to pick every other discipline from every other class.
Yeah, it's very, I think it's a breadth versus depth thing right now. Like, there's every element of everything you could ever want to have as a psionic.
Yeah.
But at the same time, yeah, I'm sticking with the Awakened Mystic this time.
Yeah, you did Order of the Immortal for the Orenthal campaign, so the psionic fighter. So Awakened Mystic, which is like the Professor X of
Because who
psionics.
doesn't want to be Professor X? I thought of my last character as more like Emma Frost, because, durability and stuff.
Good call.
But
Good call.
But yeah, but we all want to be superheroes, let's be honest. So yeah, I know that'll add a whole other layer, and it did come up in our game, like, so wait, are your abilities magic or magical? It's unclear. It's vague. Oh gosh.
Hey.
That has so much contention to it as to
Yeah.
it's kind of up to the DM a little bit.
Yeah, I remember the 3.5 magic psionics transparency rules. Like, they had to go into so many pages to discuss the separation of the two or the inclusion of the two. And I'm just going, oh god.
I think
This
we looked
hurts.
at that and said, let's not worry about that.
Just move on.
I wound up having to look at all of that stuff just because it's like, if you want ease of going into things, psionics is still magic. But I'm looking at psionics, I'm like, yeah, I can make it so much easier on myself, but the whole point is that it's also kind of not.
Mm-hmm.
So I went with
Yeah.
the not. It's not magic. Not in that same way, in any way.
So we usually do kind of a wrap up, kind of what have we learned today?
What have we learned so far for
So far.
spellcasting?
What conclusions did we arrive at based on the things we talked about? And I think they're very complex things, like magic is hard, but cool.
And fireball.
And fireball is
And
the best
fireball.
spell because it
'Cause
solves the
backguano.
problem. And yes,
Because Backguano.
always carry lots of backguano just in case. But in general, I think, I don't know if I stated before, but I sort of alluded to it. When I have a player who's totally new to any sort of tabletop role-playing game, I don't usually encourage them to go full caster right away, especially if they're not coming in at level 1, because it's complicated. And I
Oh,
think
yeah.
Really complicated.
and invariably, it's very attractive. Like, what do you mean I could set things on fire by just flicking my wrist? Like, well, we'll get there. We'll get there. Let's start
start small.
Let's start good.
Yeah.
Let's start you with
Yeah.
stabbing. Stabbing is great.
It's like, go for stabbing,
Let's
Go
get
for
you some
stabbing.
sneak attacks.
then go for the fire.
Yeah. So I think that's probably my way of going around it, but I like casters. I kind of have missed playing one, but as a DM, you get to play all the coolest casters because they're monsters.
Oh yeah.
'Cause they're
My players hate it when I play caster enemies.
I don't know what that's like at all. Counterspell.
Can't.
Oh, we didn't even talk about counterspell. Okay, we'll have to talk about counterspell next
Oh
time.
yeah, add that as a topic.
Oh, that has to be a whole thing on itself. Just counterspell.
Man, we're gonna have like a great teaser for
So
our next episode.
It's a good thing there's only one reaction, right?
Right?
I see just Rachel's rage right now.
Brief thing: Tony counterspell to revivify.
Yeah. Oh.
Yep.
Yeah,
I just recently countered a mass cure wound, so I know that
Ooh,
feeling.
I was ready for that one too, just in case.
So
You
my
monster.
desk weighs like 400 pounds. I would flip that in an instant. You counterspell that, I will flip this desk.
Oh, but see, I actually do employ the rule of the caster who's planning to cast counterspell that they must roll an Arcana check to identify the spell.
I do it if it is a spell of yours,
Right.
you
you'll
know
You
it.
see that
Yeah.
mode of flame, you're like, I mean, I know that's a fireball.
Right.
We all
Beyond
know it's a
that, I
fireball.
start to describe it, and good luck.
Right.
Good luck.
That's what I do too.
You choose whether or not you want to counterspell this.
So we have to do a deep
But-
dive on counterspell. We have to talk about schools of magic. We have to talk
Yep,
about.
because we never got into that.
So what did we talk about? What did we
Oh.
learn today?
we need to talk about arcane versus divine.
Yes,
Versus
Yeah.
nature style, whatever.
but
'Cause-
versus
Which
whatever
nature, like,
whatever it is
divine
rangers
slash
do.
nature? Because
Yeah.
divine is technically nature is divine, but it's also not from a deity, so.
nature question mark. Okay, we'll add that to our list.
Yeah, the way they interpreted nature now was just a little weird compared
Yeah.
to older editions.
Well, even in older editions, like, that was a whole thing,
It's
but I don't want to get
it's
too
flaking.
into that. But.
Okay, so but what we've learned today is material components only matter if you care.
Yeah, if you want to incorporate them.
Somatic components are the coolest,
Especially if you're a kid.
especially if you're a kid, because you get
Unless you know Latin and can do the verbal component part of it.
Oh.
well, they just
We assume.
yell things.
It sounds like overall we're pretty happy with 5th edition and how they do spellcasting. It's not perfect, it's not balanced 100%, but overall it works. It makes people happy, and you could kind of tweak the rules as you need to for your group.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, next question. How did you get into tabletop role-playing games?
I got into tabletop role-playing games from literally in high school when a friend of mine just told me, play Neverwinter Nights, and then we'll start talking about Dungeons and Dragons. And I said, okay. I don't know what you just said to me, but sure, we'll just start with that. And, actually, Neverwinter Nights is a game by BioWare that, used the 3rd edition D&D rule set, and it was set in the Forgotten Realms. And that was my introduction of the basics of how to play Dungeons and Dragons without me knowing anything.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty good primer for that edition, because we played D&D first, and then went back and played the game, and I was like, oh, this feels very familiar and comfortable.
Oh, yeah.
I know what
Yeah.
I'm doing.
And then, of course, my very first D&D campaign was me playing as a 20th level cleric.
Oh,
No big deal.
I was like, well, that's a big jump from learning how to play the game to, oh, you're going to start playing an epic level campaign. Have fun.
You're basically a
Dive in
demigod.
head first.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I did kill a god in the end of that campaign, so I'm happy about that.
There you go. Wait, I'm assuming an opposing god to your god.
Yes,
as
actually,
cleric.
I was a cleric of Kelemvor, and I got to kill Cyric, the god of the Prince of Lies, and that was fun.
Huh.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Totally
Yeah.
justified.
Huh.
Totally
Okay,
justified.
sorry. They're saying huh because I might.
Slight tangent.
No, we don't have to go into it.
No.
I might have a thing for trickster gods and be using that deity in my campaign because Princess of the Apocalypse is boring and lame until you add trickster gods, and then it's awesome. And your players are like, "Why do you create the most annoying god?" I'm like, "I don't create the god. I'm just responding to what you hate, and he's full of lies and mischief and nonsense and evil."
Yeah.
So
He's like he's like the scheming world, like he wants to rule the world kind of god, versus
Yeah.
Mask is more of just like, I'm just doing it because it's fun.
yeah. He's like,
Yeah.
I'm messing with you, but I got goals, man. Okay, I'm ambitious. I want to rule.
Yeah, that's very true.
Rachel's making mean faces at me. I can see it.
Burn the house to the ground.
Hey, you love
That
to
would
hate
be nice
him.
for him.
Yeah.
Oh no, we are going to be so happy when he's dead.
Everyone's always happy when Cyric is dead.
So, I know for the next question, by the way, we said, how did you get into podcasting? But I know you've talked about getting into podcasting. It's one of your Patreon goals for down the road, right?
Yeah, that was something I've been wanting to do for a while. I remember when I first was starting out, I thought about the idea of podcasting and trying to do, I actually had a few, close friends and other patrons kind of give me feedback on like what to focus on. And one of the things I had thought about focusing on was doing kind of like a little bit of news in the RPG community and in the industry, and also covering things like world building and how to incorporate ideas and kind of mesh them together, especially when I come up with like crazy ideas like we're going to combine an anime with a traditional fantasy novel and see what happens with this.
It's got to be bonkers, but awesome.
Yes, it does end up being bonkers usually. But it was one of those ideas I went, okay, it would be kind of fun to explore and try to like bring other people, especially the listeners, into like what's going on in the community, in the industry. So, because there's always so much happening and not a lot of people know what's happening. And by the time someone else finds out, it's like 6 months ago that this news came out.
Yeah, that's how I feel. I
Yeah.
feel like I'm behind the curve until literally you tell me something, Jacky, that I'm like, oh yeah, of course there's drama about such and such. now that you're telling me, I'm fully aware of it.
Like I'm fully aware.
Yeah.
Otherwise, but yeah. So is that still something you hope to do down the road? If the support is there?
Yeah, if the support is there, it's very hard because like I actually want to do it well, and so like I want to have like show notes, take the time to like research everything and have it all prepared. I've had the audio software for the last 2 years already. I've been sitting on it, so it's not. I'm just like, okay, I'll get there one day.
So what I'm hearing is we just need people to listen to this, realize that you're just waiting for them to flock to you, and be like, Jacky, you simply must make this podcast now.
Exactly.
Yeah, actually, the idea was from that, because that was one of my original goals, and then now there's this little streaming idea coming with it, and like I can do the show live and then have it transform into a podcast as later on. And so that was an idea that I'm kind of like, well, I would like to sit on that and actually make that happen one day.
Yeah, well, I that's something I would look forward to. And so far, we're just enjoying have you as a guest on our show.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. And considering your wealth of knowledge, what's your favorite RPG system to play?
Oh my goodness. I will tell you, I dreaded this question for, once I saw it. I just went, I don't know. I have to think about this. This is very hard because a lot of different systems are good for different things.
Right. Okay. We've offered to rephrase it as things like, which system are you most excited to play right now? So it doesn't have to be the favorite to end all favorites. We're not going to check back in a year and be like, Jacky, you lied to us. You no longer have that as your favorite system. It's not a favorite child. It's,
but is it?
But is it?
That's why I think people react to this question. Everyone goes, oh no, how could you do this to me? Or they go, it's D&D, guys. It's D&D.
If I want to say for the newest system I'm excited to play right now, it would definitely have to be Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition.
Knew it.
Yeah. We're just like, called it.
Knew it.
I've been talking about it for I think since our meetup, and I'm just me constantly thinking about all the other World of Darkness series that are going to eventually come out. I'm super ecstatic, especially since I love Mage the Ascension. Go figure.
Never would have seen that coming. It's not like it's not on brand at all.
It's not on brand at all. Or like Changeling, which is also partially on brand. So it's like, but I just really like how streamlined it is. It's much more friendly to the storyteller, which is the game master, and it is definitely very narratively driven, which is very good for the current kind of playstyle environment that most new incoming RPG players are for. Especially like you see how Dungeons and Dragons has made it a lot easier for newcomers to get in, and if a game can do that, it would usually be very successful. So I'm really looking forward to it. It's a lot different of a story than what you find in like fantasy stories. It's definitely it actually has a mature rating, so it's going to have a lot of darker themes.
Yeah. So Tony and I got to play like a one shot of this at Gen Con, and I was like, it'll be fun. People keep telling us it's awesome. It was fun. It was awesome. But the points where I'm like, what the heck are we doing? We're like melting someone with acid. I don't understand. I'm just along for the ride. Oh my gosh. Everything's on fire. Like
everything's fine.
It was insane. Like it was fun, and I was like, and I'm not really into vampires, but like I thought it really encouraged like good cooperation around the table and made us want to engage with each other. But there are points where I was like, this is so crazy.
Oh, wait until you play other games like being a werewolf or a mage or a changeling. The dynamics are also going to be very similar, but also very different. Especially for werewolves, you're going to get to that point where, we're probably going to change soon, and we may cause a massacre any second. This might not be good at all.
This is going to be great. Everything's fine.
Yeah, and then Mages is going to be, look, we want to do this cool thing, and we just caused the world to break, and wait, oh no, it's about to break. Oh god, what are we going to do? We got to fix this. We got to patch it now.
Everything's on fire.
Everything's on fire or about to be on fire.
Yeah.
Literally or metaphorically speaking, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. In Mage's case, it's always on fire.
You're just creating patches for it.
Yeah. I think the first time I think one of the times I played Mage after a long hiatus, I played in a one shot, and the ending of that one shot literally was the hotel was on fire, and I'm just like normal, another day in the office.
Expected.
Don't worry about it. We're good, everybody.
Yeah, it's all fine. This is normal.
Yeah, this is perfectly normal. No, I just like it. It's a very pretty user-friendly system, and it's just a lot easier for the GM now to run a story and not be boggled down by like the older mechanics, how it was a lot more clunkier. And so I'm really looking forward to it.
Nice. Very cool. Well, final question for our intense, hard-hitting journalism questions here.
Yes. We ask the tough questions.
Oh, yes.
We do.
Do you have a favorite memory or moment you are most proud of as a DM or a player, or one of each?
Okay, I have one for a DM. So it's Fae related, go figure. It actually happened probably our fourth session for my main campaign that I'm doing, and so it's a 3-year long campaign we're still doing.
Been there.
Yeah. Our Dragonborn warlock, his patron was Queen Mab, and in one of the sequences where he's in a dream and she actually connects with him through dreams, she's kind of giving like this edict to him on what he needs to start doing because he acquired like this very powerful magical artifact. And she wants it. He doesn't trust her, obviously, like any sane person would, and is kind of worried about what it could do. And so he's trying to resist, but what she does is she reveals his entire clan all frozen solid in this veil in the Feywild, and reminds him of the fact that they're all her prisoners at her mercy. And the one thing I did as a DM is as I was narrating the entire conversation was I like to walk sometimes in my conversation. So I walked around the player to literally behind the player, and I just leaned in ever so gently into his left ear and whispered, "You are mine forever," and very ASMR style. And he literally freaked out and jumped out of his seat. And that was probably the most terrifying portrayal I've done of Mav. And to this day, my characters, all the players know they will have to eventually go back to the Feywild. But they've been avoiding it for the last 2 years. They've been actively avoiding it for 2 years. And as a result of that, they're now going through the time travel arc instead. And I'm just like, you're gonna eventually have to deal with the Feywild, right?
And they're like, no.
No, thank
Not
you.
if we all die first.
Well, yeah, we'll get to it later, I'm sure.
My portrayal of Mav is very heavily inspired by Jim Butcher's Dresden Files, mixed in with a lot of variations from Arthurian legend and other Celtic legends. So she's 5 times scarier than she's going to be portrayed in Dresden Files.
Because you just got to amp it up a bit.
Oh, I just got to make it creepy and scary all the time.
Yeah.
All right. On that note, thank you so much for joining us, Jacky.
Yay.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we had a blast.
I did too.
Yeah, we will be having you back again for Spellcasting Part 2, Counterspells.
Dun, dun, dun.
Spellcasting,
It's going to be mostly
second
Counterspell.
level.
Oh,
It's mostly
there you go.
counterspell.
Ooh.
You're right.
It's mostly Counterspell.
The war of counterspell begins.
Oh, boy.
Hey everyone, today we're going to be highlighting the Patreon for Death by Mage. Our friend Jacky, better known as Death by Mage, works hard to help game masters, dungeon masters, and storytellers improve their craft. How? By providing blog articles and other homebrewed content, like his book, Journey into the Feywild, which is a gold bestseller on the Dungeon Masters Guild. His patrons enjoy benefits like patron-only posts, homebrew content, and custom NPCs, and the chance to have Jacky answer your DM questions. Now, not only is Jacky incredibly talented, he is a kind and generous person that we are so lucky to have the chance to know. If you're interested, please check him out. You can basically find him everywhere as Death by Mage. It's deathbymage.com, Facebook Death by Mage, or on Twitter at Death by Mage. And absolutely check out his book, Journey into the Feywild, on the DM's Guild. So show your love and support and check out the Patreon of Death by Mage.